The moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you've already lost. Picture this: you're in a meeting. Someone questions your decision. Your chest tightens. Your heartbeat accelerates. Your mind scrambles to build a fortress of justification. Every instinct in your body is screaming at you to explain, to defend, to prove them wrong. So you do. You launch into a detailed explanation of your reasoning, your research, your logic. You think you're being thorough. You think you're standing your ground. You think you're protecting your reputation. But here's what actually just happened: you entered a courtroom where they are the judge and you are the defendant. You accepted their authority to question you. You submitted to their frame. And in that exact moment, regardless of how good your explanation is, you lost the psychological battle for dominance. Because authority doesn't defend. Authority decides. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this in the 1500s. He wrote extensively about power dynamics, about perception versus reality, about how the masses see only what you show them. And his final, most devastating insight was this: the moment you justify yourself, you've announced to everyone watching that you believe you need their permission to exist. Today, we're going to dissect Machiavelli's final power move, the psychological strategy of never defending yourself. You'll learn 5 techniques that flip power dynamics instantly, why your biology betrays you into defensiveness, and how to build the internal architecture that makes you psychologically untouchable. This isn't about being cold or arrogant. This is about sovereignty. The childhood program. So why do you do this? Why is your first instinct when challenged to open your mouth and defend yourself? It starts before you can even remember. You're 5 years old. You take a cookie before dinner. Your parent sees you. Why did you do that? They demand. Their voice has that edge. That tone that means consequences are coming. And in that moment, you learn the most important survival equation of childhood: authority figure questions me plus I provide acceptable explanation equals I avoid punishment. It works. You explain. They soften. You're safe. The pattern is encoded into your nervous system. You do it again at 6 when the teacher questions your homework. At 12 when your coach challenges your effort. At 18 when your professor doubts your thesis. At 25 when your boss questions your judgment. At 35 when your board demands justification. The pattern became hardwired. When someone with perceived power challenges you, you must build a logical case for why you deserve to not be punished. It kept you safe as a child. It kept you fed, sheltered, accepted, loved. But here's the problem: you're not a child anymore. Yet you're still running that same primitive software. You're projecting parental authority onto everyone you meet: your colleague, your partner, your client, the stranger on social media, even people who have zero actual power over you. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." He understood that perceived authority matters infinitely more than actual competence. And the fastest way to destroy perceived authority is to act like you need someone else's approval. When you defend yourself, you're saying, "Please understand me so I can feel safe." When you refuse to defend, you're saying, "I am safe regardless of whether you understand me or not." One is the psychology of a subordinate. The other is the psychology of a sovereign. And powerful people, true wielders of power, can tell the difference instantly. The trap, the invisible courtroom. Here's what you need to understand about power dynamics: the courtroom only exists if you walk into it. When someone questions your decision, they're not really asking for information. They're not confused and seeking clarity. They're testing whether you believe you owe them an explanation. It's a probe. A psychological scan to determine your position in the hierarchy. Think about it. When a CEO makes a decision, does the intern get to say, "Why did you do it that way?" and expect a detailed breakdown? No. The question itself would be inappropriate because everyone understands the power structure. The intern doesn't have standing to audit the CEO's decisions. But when you're building authority, when you're in that ambiguous middle zone where your status isn't yet established, people will test you constantly. And every time you explain, you're sending a signal: I accept your right to audit my decisions. I accept that my choices require your validation. I am subordinate to your judgment. This is why middle managers explain everything and executives explain nothing. It's not that executives are smarter or more secure. It's that they understand the game being played. Carl said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you cannot become who you truly are while you're constantly performing for an invisible jury. Every explanation is a performance. Every justification is a plea for approval. And here's the biological mechanism at play. When you're questioned, your amygdala, the ancient, reptilian part of your brain, interprets it as a threat. Your body floods with cortisol. Your nervous system screams, "Defend yourself or die." This is tribal programming. In our evolutionary past, being questioned by the group meant potential exile. Exile meant death. So your brain does what it's been trained to do for survival, seek safety through explanation. But in the modern world of status games and social hierarchies, the defensive crouch is exactly what strips you of authority. The very behavior designed to protect you is the behavior that destroys your power. So what's the alternative? How do you respond when attacked without defending? Let me show you Machiavelli's techniques. Technique number 1, the void what if. When someone questioned you, you did nothing? Let me show you exactly what this looks like. Someone says, "I don't understand why you're taking this approach. It seems risky and poorly thought out." The old you or the subordinate you would immediately say, "Well, actually, if you look at the data from last quarter and consider the market trends and competitive landscape, you'll see that this is actually the safest option because of X, Y, and Z factors." Defensive. Eager. Weak. You've entered the courtroom. Now watch the Machiavellian approach. You look at them. You hold their gaze for 2, 3, 4 seconds. Your face remains completely neutral. Not angry. Not defensive. Not smug. Just present. Just there. Then you say one word, "Noted." And you move on. You break eye contact. You return to what you were doing. That's it. Nothing more. What have you just done? You've created a psychological vacuum. The mechanism, the human brain cannot tolerate silence during a challenge. Silence suggests rupture. It suggests you're not playing by the expected social rules. It makes people deeply, viscerally uncomfortable because they can't categorize you. When someone challenges you, they're throwing you a ball. They expect you to catch it and throw it back, to engage in the game of attack and defense. Instead, you let the ball drop. You refuse to play catch. You didn't even acknowledge that a game was being proposed. In that silence, they are sitting with their own challenge. They threw an attack expecting resistance. Resistance would have given them something to fight against, something to push harder on. Instead, they got nothing. Void. Emptiness. And here's what happens next. In about 70% of cases, they start explaining themselves. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, I just wanted to understand the thinking behind it. I was just curious about the approach because I've seen similar strategies and... Now they're defending why they questioned you in the first place. The power dynamic has flipped without you saying a single defensive word. This is weaponized indifference. Not because you don't care about your decision, you do. But because you don't need their comprehension to validate it. You don't need their approval to proceed. You don't need their permission to exist. A king does not pause his royal procession to explain to a commoner why he chose this particular route to the castle. The king has decided. The procession continues. That's sovereignty. Technique number 2, the Aikido Agreement. Sometimes silence isn't appropriate for the context. Sometimes you're in a situation where saying nothing would create more problems, a team meeting, a negotiation, a relationship conversation. That's when you use the Aikido technique. In martial arts, Aikido is the art of using your opponent's force against them. They push, you pull. They expect resistance, you give flow. They swing hard, you redirect their energy and they defeat themselves. The same principle applies to psychological combat. When someone challenges you, they're expecting you to push back. They want resistance because resistance gives them something to fight against, something to argue with, something to overcome. Their entire attack is predicated on you defending the position they're attacking. Instead, you agree. But not the way they expect. Here's the scenario. Someone says, "Your proposal is going to cost too much money. This is too expensive for what we're getting." The defensive response, "No, it's not too expensive. If you actually calculate the ROI over 18 months and factor in the efficiency gains and the competitive advantage and the long-term value creation, you'll see it's actually quite reasonable. You're arguing. You're defending. You're in their frame. The Aikido response, you look at them calmly. You say, you're right. It's expensive. That's exactly why it works. Stop. Let that sit in the room for 3 seconds. The power of the pause. Do you see what just happened? You agreed with their objection, which completely disarmed their attack. They can't argue with you because you agreed with them. But you didn't concede anything. Instead, you reframed the objection as the reason for your decision. Expensive isn't a bug in your proposal. It's a feature. It's proof of value. It's a signal of quality. You've taken their weapon and used it as evidence of your brilliance. This creates massive cognitive dissonance in the challenger. Their brain is doing mental gymnastics. Wait, they agreed with me. But they're still doing what they wanted. How did I just lose this argument? Another example, this strategy is too aggressive. You're being reckless. Defensive response, I'm not being reckless at all. This is actually very carefully calibrated, and if you understood the market dynamics and risk mitigation strategies. Aikido response, that's the point. Cautious didn't get us here. Aggressive is what the moment requires. You've taken their accusation and owned it. You've transformed their criticism into your strategic advantage. This requires tremendous internal confidence because you're not denying the accusation, you're embracing it and recontextualizing it as intentional mastery. Machiavelli wrote, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. People judge by appearance, by perception. When you appear completely unbothered by an accusation, even better, when you appear to embrace it as part of your strategy, they assume you're operating at a level they don't understand. They assume it was calculated all along. Technique number 3, the mirror. Now we go deeper into the structure of power. There's a meta-architecture to every conversation. Every interaction has roles that are being negotiated in real time: questioner and questioned, challenger and defender, judge and defendant. Most people don't realize they have a choice about which role they play. When someone questions you, your childhood programming automatically makes you accept the role of defendant. You step into the courtroom, you stand in the dock, you prepare your defense. But that role is a trap. The advanced move, the one that Machiavelli would whisper to a prince, is to simply refuse the role and hand it back to them. You do this by reflecting the question back as an observation about their psychology, not an answer about your behavior. Here's what this looks like. Them, why are you being so difficult about this? You're making this unnecessarily complicated. Defensive you, I'm not being difficult. I'm just trying to make sure we do this right, and if you would just listen to what I'm actually saying instead of jumping to conclusions. Machiavellian you, what makes you interpret clarity as difficulty? The frame flip, boom. Do you see what just happened? The entire frame of the conversation shifted. We're no longer talking about whether you're being difficult. We're now talking about their interpretation process. We're analyzing them, not defending you. You've become the psychologist. They've become the patient on the couch. You're no longer defending your behavior, you're examining theirs. And this is psychologically infuriating to someone who was trying to dominate you because they expected you to be reactive and defensive. Another example, them, you're being unreasonable. This is an unreasonable position to take. Defensive you, no, I'm being perfectly reasonable, you're the one who. Machiavellian you. When you use words like unreasonable, what are you actually asking me to do? You're not arguing. You're not defending. You're curiously examining their accusation as if it's a specimen under a microscope. That's an interesting choice of words. What do you think is driving your need to label me that way? This signals that you're operating from a completely different level of consciousness than they are. They're in the emotional, reactive mode, attacking and defending. You're in the analytical, observational mode, studying and understanding. You've left the battlefield and moved to the observatory tower. And from up there, you're not a participant in their drama. You're a witness to it. Technique number 4, strategic opacity. There's a concept in intelligence operations called need to know. You only share information with people who need it to accomplish their specific function. Everything else is restricted. Compartmentalized. Protected. Most people operate on the opposite principle in their daily lives. They think transparency equals trustworthiness. They think explaining everything makes them appear competent and collaborative. They think openness builds relationships. And sometimes it does. But not with power. Not in hierarchies. Not when status is being negotiated. In status hierarchies, the person with the most information has the most power. And when you explain everything, when you open your entire decision-making process for audit, you're handing out your strategic information for free. Here are the verbal shields, the phrases that create boundaries without creating conflict. Someone questions your approach, that's not something I'm discussing right now. Someone wants to know your reasoning, I'll share that when it's relevant. Someone demands justification, I've made the decision. Notice the pattern. You're not being rude. You're not being defensive. You're not attacking them or questioning their right to ask. You're simply drawing a boundary around your decision-making process. You're saying, this is not open for debate. The psychology of information control, when you explain your reasoning, you reveal your values. You reveal your insecurities. You reveal your pressure points. I'm doing this because I'm worried about X, now they know X is your vulnerability. I chose this because I was concerned people would think Y. Now they know you care about Y's opinion more than your own judgment. I decided this way because in the past Z happened, now they know your past wounds and can weaponize them. Robertgreene codified this as Law 3 in the 48 Laws of Power, conceal your intentions. But it's deeper than just concealing. It's about understanding that your reasoning, your fears, your doubts, your process, that's all yours. That's your intellectual property. You don't owe it to anyone just because they asked. Strategic opacity keeps you unpredictable. And unpredictability is power because it means people can't manipulate you. They don't know which levers to pull because you haven't shown them where the levers are. They don't know which buttons to push because you haven't mapped out your control panel for them. You become a black box. Input goes in. Output comes out. But the internal mechanism remains mysterious. And mystery is magnetic. Mystery commands respect. Technique number 5. The sovereign admission now for the paradox. Everything I've just taught you about never defending yourself has an exception. And understanding this exception is what separates tactics from true mastery. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is admit a mistake. Completely. Totally. Without explanation. Without justification. Without caveat. But here's the critical distinction that most people miss: you admit the action, not the character assassination. They simply state, the project had errors. I'll fix them. Deep red background. Painted in epic fantasy realism, romantic realism style, high contrast chiaroscuro lighting, dramatic painted quality. Here's the scenario: someone says, you completely screwed up that project. You're incompetent. This proves you're not capable of handling responsibility. The defensive response, I'm not incompetent. The data was incomplete, the timeline was unrealistic, the team was understaffed, the requirements kept changing, and if you had given me proper resources and realistic expectations, this never would have happened. And by the way, you're being completely unfair because. The sovereign admission, you look at them calmly. You say, you're right. The project had errors. I'll fix them. And then you stop talking. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't list the 17 factors beyond your control. You just own the mistake and move forward. The psychological devastation, what just happened? You agreed with the factual problem, the project had errors, but you completely ignore the character attack, you're incompetent. You didn't dignify it with a defense. You didn't engage with it at all. You treated it like it didn't exist. This is psychologically devastating to the attacker because they wanted a fight. They loaded their accusation with both factual criticism and personal attack specifically to trigger your ego. They wanted you to defend your competence so they could list more examples of your failures, so they could pile on more evidence, so they could crush you in front of others. Instead, you took ownership of the factual mistake so quickly and calmly that they look hysterical for even bringing up incompetence. You made their personal attack look petty and emotional compared to your factual and composed response. Only a truly competent person can admit mistakes this easily. Insecure people fight to the death over every tiny error because they believe one mistake equals total worthlessness. Their entire self-concept is fragile, so every criticism becomes an existential threat. Secure people say, "Yep, I miscalculated that." Moving on. They don't attach their identity to being perfect. They attach their identity to being effective over time. One error is just data. A learning opportunity. A correction to make. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." When you can admit a factual error without shame, without accepting the tribe's judgment that you are fundamentally flawed, you prove you're not overwhelmed by the tribe's opinion. You prove you have an internal compass that doesn't depend on never making mistakes. This creates grudging respect even from your enemies because it's so rare. Most people would rather die than admit they were wrong. When you do it easily, without drama, without defensive energy, it signals unshakable internal stability. The internal architecture here's what you need to understand. None of these techniques work if you're just performing them on the surface while internally you're still desperate for approval. If you use silence but your eyes are darting around seeking validation, if your voice is shaking, if your body language is screaming, "Please don't hurt me," the technique fails. If you try the Aikido Agreement but your energy is defensive and wounded, people will see through it instantly. If you attempt the mirror but you're actually terrified of what they think, they'll sense your fear. This is why the real work isn't in the techniques. The real work is in building the internal architecture that supports them. The question of the wound: why does it hurt when someone questions you? Why does criticism sting? Why does an accusation make your heart race and your mind scramble? Because they're touching a wound that already exists. If someone calls you incompetent and you feel rage, it's because part of you already fears you're incompetent. If someone calls you selfish and you feel compelled to defend yourself with a list of all the generous things you've done, it's because you haven't fully accepted that yes, sometimes you are selfish, and that's part of being human. Carljung called this the shadow, the parts of yourself you've disowned and projected into darkness. The aspects of your personality you reject, deny, refuse to acknowledge. And here's the brutal truth that Machiavelli understood but never wrote explicitly: any part of your shadow that you haven't integrated becomes a weapon someone else can use against you. The blue skin test: if I tell you right now that you have blue skin, will you get angry? Will you feel insulted? Will you defend yourself? No. You'll think I'm insane. You won't feel any need to explain that your skin isn't blue because you know with absolute certainty that it isn't. There's no wound there. There's no question in your mind. So the accusation has no power. But if I tell you you're a fraud, and you immediately launch into your credentials, your accomplishments, your track record, your testimonials, I found the wound. I know that some part of you suspects I might be right. I know that some part of you questions your own legitimacy. And now I know exactly where to attack you. The ultimate defense isn't a verbal technique. It's not a clever response. It's not a tactical move. It's self-knowledge. It's psychological integration. It's shadow work. It's looking into your own darkness, your own capacity for selfishness, for cruelty, for incompetence, for weakness, for all the things you've been taught to deny, and saying, yes, I contain that. So does everyone else. These capacities don't define me, but I don't deny them. I am human, and humans contain multitudes. When you've done that work, when you've accepted your full humanity including the ugly parts, you become psychologically bulletproof. Not because you're perfect. Because you're no longer hiding anything from yourself. You cannot shame someone who has already accepted themselves completely. You cannot expose someone who has nothing left to hide. You cannot weaponize someone's shadow against them when they've already integrated it into their conscious awareness. This is sovereignty. Not dominance. Not arrogance. Not hardness. Sovereignty. Sovereignty is the internal state where you don't need external validation to know who you are. You don't need their approval. You don't need their understanding. You don't need their judgment to tell you your worth. You know yourself. And that knowledge makes you untouchable. The 10-day protocol. No defense, so here's your challenge. For the next 10 days, you're going to run an experiment in your own life. I call it the no defense protocol. The rules. Rule 1, if you're late, say I'm late. Don't give the reason. Not traffic was terrible. Not my alarm didn't go off. Not something unexpected came up. Just, I'm late. And nothing more. Rule 2, if someone questions your decision, use one of the 5 techniques we covered. The void. The Aikido Agreement. The mirror. Strategic opacity. The sovereign admission. But never explain. Never justify. Never defend. Rule 3, if you make a mistake, own it without justifying it. I was wrong is a complete sentence. I was wrong because of these 17 factors that were beyond my control, and here's why it's not really my fault is weakness disguised as responsibility. The discomfort warning, this will be uncomfortable. Extremely uncomfortable. Your nervous system will scream at you. Your childhood programming will tell you that you're being rude, that you're going to be punished, that people will reject you, that you'll lose relationships, that you'll be seen as cold or arrogant or difficult. Sit in that discomfort. Don't run from it. That discomfort is your ego dying. And your ego death is the birth of your sovereignty. The caterpillar must dissolve completely before the butterfly emerges. There's no way around the dissolution. Only through it. What you'll notice. Days 1 to 3, confusion. Your own confusion and others' confusion. You'll catch yourself about to explain and have to stop mid-sentence. People will look at you strangely when you don't provide the expected justification. Hold your ground. Days 4 to 6, testing. People will push harder. They'll escalate. That's it? That's all you're going to say. They're testing whether this is real or just a phase. They're testing whether you'll crack under increased pressure. Don't crack. Day 7 to 8, the shift. Something changes. You'll notice people treating you differently. With more respect. With more caution. With more curiosity. They won't know why. You won't fully know why. But the energy around you will shift. Days 9 to 10, integration. You'll start to feel it internally. The need to explain will weaken. The urge to defend will quiet. You'll catch yourself naturally responding from sovereignty without having to consciously apply a technique. It's becoming you. The deeper transformation. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Your external behavior is rewiring your internal narrative. When you stop joking about being incompetent, you stop thinking of yourself as incompetent. When you stop explaining why you're late, you start valuing your time differently. When you stop defending your decisions, you start trusting your judgment more deeply. Your words create your reality. The stories you tell about yourself. Even in small moments, even in throwaway comments, even in defensive explanations, become the truth you believe. Change the words, change the belief. Change the belief, change the behavior. Change the behavior, change your life. And at the end of 10 days, you'll notice something profound. People are drawn to you differently. There's a magnetism that wasn't there before. Because you've stopped seeking approval. You've stopped performing for validation. You've stopped checking the social scoreboard every 5 seconds to see if you're winning. You're just there. Decided. Whole. Present. Sovereign. And that kind of presence is magnetic because it's so rare. The closer, the final truth the moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you've already lost. This isn't just a tactic. This isn't just a technique. This is a fundamental truth about power that Machiavelli understood 500 years ago. Power doesn't explain itself. Authority doesn't justify itself. Sovereignty doesn't seek permission. When you defend yourself, you're not providing information. You're broadcasting a signal. I accept your authority to judge me. I accept that my existence requires your approval. I accept my subordinate position in this hierarchy. And once you've broadcast that signal, no amount of logical argumentation will change what they've already concluded about you. You've submitted. The game is over. But what if you didn't? What if you refused to enter the courtroom? What if you met accusations with silence? What if you agreed with objections and reframed them as strategic advantages? What if you reflected questions back as observations about their psychology? What if you created boundaries around your decision-making process? What if you admitted mistakes without accepting character assassination? You become untouchable. This isn't about being cold. This isn't about being arrogant. This isn't about lacking empathy or connection or humanity. This is about refusing to let other people's need for control become your responsibility to manage. This is about understanding that their discomfort with your boundaries is theirs to handle, not yours to fix. This is about sovereignty. The discomfort is growth. If this information makes you uncomfortable, if something in you is resisting these ideas, good. That's your ego sensing its own obsolescence. That discomfort is awareness. That resistance is the sound of your childhood programming recognizing it's about to be deleted. That fear you feel? That's the part of you that's been seeking approval your entire life realizing it's about to lose its job. And yes, it's terrifying to that part. Because that part was born to protect you by making you acceptable to authority figures. It served you well when you were 5 years old and powerless. But you're not 5 anymore. And it's time to let that part go. The permission. This information isn't for everyone. It's for the part of you that's exhausted from performing. The part that's tired of twisting yourself into shapes to make other people comfortable. The part that's sick of giving away power in tiny transactions your entire life, explanations, justifications, defenses, apologies for existing. If that resonates with you, then you're ready. Don't subscribe to this channel because I'm asking you to. Subscribe because you've made a decision. A decision that you're done being interrogated by people who have no authority over you. That you're done explaining yourself to people whose understanding is none of your business. That you're done defending your existence to anyone. Welcome to the Psych Architect. Let's build the kind of psychological structures that most people are too afraid to even look at. Machiavelli's final power move isn't complicated. It's just this: never defend yourself. The moment you refuse to defend, you stop being a defendant. And the moment you stop being a defendant, you become sovereign. That's the move. Now make it yours.